Reactive training systems.
Yeah, I realized I appreciate the dad joke, the pun around Mike. I didn't realize like the purpose of dad jokes. It's partially fun. I didn't realize it's partially like so you don't go insane.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You're like, I need to inject levity wherever I can, or I will lose it.
Yeah. It's definitely not
Absolutely.
for the recipient of the dad joke. The beneficiary is the teller. 100%.
Taking it. I'm gonna weave this into one of my mental health presentations. Dad jokes are actually a coping strategy. I didn't realize that. Like,
Absolutely.
okay, that totally makes sense. Okay,
Hence-
I'm all in on the dad
Yeah.
jokes.
Hence the ubiquity, right? Like,
Yeah, watching sports dad jokes, chicken wings. It's men's mental health coping strategies.
those are good ones, at least, right?
Yeah.
How's it been, Newton?
Things have been good. It's interesting. Like now that Nationals is done, I remember like when Mike Tyson did his last fight, when he's already, I forget who he just fought, but it wasn't too long ago.
Like the recent one?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he said he probably won't do that again because to do that, he's got to alter his mindset, and he kind of turns into this like kind of not awful person, but someone he doesn't like. And I didn't go that far, but once Nationals was done, I was like, oh, you let your brain rev up pretty high to stay focused on this. And so there's like been a ramp down period. It's kind of interesting because some of it's ramping down. Some of it is like I developed hyper focus and just started to shut out parts of society. And going forward, I've kind of made the choice of like, yeah, I'm not going back. I'm going to keep that revved high because I'm now protecting some cognitive bandwidth and maybe some emotional bandwidth that I didn't know I was just kind of giving away to the world.
I see.
So
Yeah.
I'm learning a lot by reintegrating into society and then choosing like, yeah, actually, I only want to partially reintegrate.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. So, are there like practical things that you're doing to manage that?
Yes. So if you listen to some of the other podcasts I've done that are more around mental health, like I talk about like, I know I'm very much a people pleaser, and some of that does come from a place of kindness. And some of that comes from like straight up insecurity of how I was raised. And so I developed this mantra that says, I'm responsible for staying in integrity with my values. I am not responsible for your comfort.
Yeah.
And so when I tell myself that, suddenly there's like this guardrail of like, oh, where are all the places you're like overextending yourself because you're taking responsibility for someone else's comfort? Like, oh, I want to make sure they feel this way or that way. But I'm like, that's totally out of my control. So instead, I'm going to say it kind of like trust the process. It's like, I know my values and therefore the behaviors they imply. And then your reaction to them, like that, I was going to say that's your problem. That's a little negative. That's out of my control.
Right.
I've heard it said that it's your responsibility, right?
Yeah.
It's probably a slightly nicer way of saying that, but getting at the same sort of thing. That's really interesting.
Yeah. And then the other reflection I've been having is, I think especially when you get down to something like 56 kilo and you show up with, veins popping out of your abs, there's this like assumption like, dude, what are you doing? This is completely unsustainable. I'm not sure it's unsustainable, actually. So I'm taking two mindsets to it, where it's like, some of this is probably unsustainable if I approach it the way I am. Some of this is like, this could just be a very harsh learning curve. So now that I've done the cut to 56 kilo twice, like the second time was easier, even though I didn't nail it, like, which we can talk about how the meet went. But I'm like, well, if the second one got easier, what happens on the third one or the fourth one?
Right.
And so do I eventually reach some state where I'm like, yeah, I can make 56 kilo pretty easily and walk around society with veins popping on my abs, even though people are telling me like you're physiologically not supposed to do that. Like, well, maybe you're right, but maybe no one else figured it out. So I'll go figure it out.
I totally relate to that type of mindset for sure. You know, I think there's a lot of creative solutions that are born from that type of interaction. You know, the prevailing wisdom is whatever X, Y, and Z. You know, and you go, well, maybe that's right, but maybe I'm the guy to figure it out. You know, there's a little bit of arrogance to it, at least in my, just speaking for myself, I guess. But um, there's a time and place for that, I guess.
I guess it's arrogance, but on the other hand, we're doing a sport where we're all trying to break like records. So I'm like, we're literally trying to push the edge of human performance. Like we saw a 75 kilo lifter squat almost 700 pounds. That's not supposed to happen. But clearly we're like, well, if he can get to 700, can someone get to 800? I don't know. So it seems like every time we start putting limitations on, someone shows up and says like, yeah, well, I did it anyway.
Yeah, well,
So what?
I mean, that's a good
Yeah.
point about like that being kind of baked into the nature of the sport. Like the whole point of it is like, yeah, most people can't do that, but I can. You know, I mean, that's true at
Yeah.
all levels of the sport too. Like even if you're, you know, kind of just getting into this, you're a lifting enthusiast, you know, and maybe you're not even making it onto the national scene yet. Um, you're still stronger than everybody. Like if you take a more holistic population approach, you know. So I I think you're onto something, that mentality is just kind of baked into it. But I think there's advantages to that. I mean, this ties into something that I've kind of thought for a long time, and it's one of those things you believe but can't really prove. I think there are things that I've learned, lessons that I've learned through, um, in this case, lifting, but it doesn't necessarily have to be lifting. It could be just any disciplined pursuit that takes place over a long period of time. There's things that you learn that you then export to other facets of life. You know, and there's always kind of this debate, I guess, over, you know, does powerlifting just select for people who have that type of mindset, or does it cultivate that type of mindset? And to me, from where I sit, it kind of looks like, I'm sure there's some selection, but there also seems to be some cultivation going on.
Yeah, I think there's probably a little of both. So there's this book I like to refer to a lot by Cal Newport. I think he's a CS professor up in Pennsylvania, and it's called "So Good They Can't Ignore You." And so when he was about to go get his PhD, before he went and did that, he, being a scientist, said, "Well, I want to really study like what is the path for people who become like world class in something." And so I'm going to go talk to a bunch of world-class experts across a bunch of fields and see like, hey, what was your story? And what he found was he couldn't find people who they like knew their passion very early on and invested and became world-class. Like the only example he could think of was Kobe Bryant. And what he found for everyone else was they found something that stoked curiosity. So they kept going. And then they peeled layers of the onion. They found more value in it. So they kept going. And over time, you kind of build love and passion for that activity. So like, there's got to be enough of your mindset that keeps you curious about this powerlifting thing that you don't quit, but you build the meaning and purpose and passion for the sport over time. So I think it's both. Like you need the magical intersection of both.
Yeah. Well, if I could for a moment lead us all out of our depth, just kind of muse on some things. Um, I've kind of wondered something similar when it comes to, uh, the domain that comes to mind for me is like business strategy, but it could be any sort of like long-term goal setting environment. Uh, there's kind of what appears to me to be the popular narrative of like, you know, you find something that you want to achieve, you set your sights on it, and you work really hard and for a long period of time, and there's setbacks along the way, but eventually you achieve it. And that just has not been my experience at all, if I'm being totally honest. It's been more like, if I think back to where I was 5 years ago, I would be surprised to be sitting in this seat, you know, and it gets a little bit less true the older I get, like I think life's trajectory starts to become a little bit more predictable later on. But this was especially true like in my 20s, even into my early 30s. Like you go back 5 years and you think, man, I would not have predicted to be here 5 years ago. So what sense does it make to then try to predict where I'm going to be 5 years into the future and, like orient my whole life around the pursuit of that? What seemed to make more sense to me was just to take the next step, and be alert to opportunities as they present themselves.
Yeah, I think there's actually like a good analogy for this if you compare like my career and your career. Like I think I used to try so people would come to me and say like, "Hey, can I get some career advice? Like how did you move up in your career?" And I used to try to like, I don't know, put together a narrative about like, "Oh, well there's a system and you take these logical steps." And what has more recently turned into like, I don't know, man. Like I winged it and I tried to not get knocked out of the system. I tried to understand how the system rewards you. And now that I think about like your journey and my journey, I think there's actually a powerlifting analogy here where I basically said like, I need a templatized approach. So I'm going in a big structured organization because like in many ways I'm pretty risk averse with my career. So I'm like, hey, you lay out the incentives, you lay out the goals, I'll try to hit them. And then I would do that. And over time, as I gained comfort in that system, I'd start to take more chances and say, yeah, I'm actually going to do this thing because it sounds more interesting, even though it works counter to the incentives. And that grew and grew and grew. And now I'm at a point where I'm like, it almost feels like an artistic pursuit where like following the rules and breaking the rules, there's like this fun dynamic between them. Whereas what you just laid out, like as an entrepreneur, you're like, hey, there's no structure here. It's like all, you chose a few things like powerlifting,
Right.
coaching. I want to develop a methodology towards that sport, but that's a lot of white space.
Yeah.
And so I think it's kind of like I'm the one who downloaded a bunch of powerlifting programs off the internet. You're the one where it's like, I'm going to go in and I'm going to lift some weights and I'm going to follow what's pretty interesting in the gym.
Well, I mean, that if I was to comment on kind of how your trajectory appears from where I sit, which is probably pretty low resolution if we're being fair, but it does appear that way. It appears like you started off um, doing one set of things, and then as time has gone on, you've kind of continued to follow your interests and continued to. I mean, you've got to do it, like you said, within the framework of the game that you're playing. You're you have to keep playing in order to continue progressing. So that's kind of the long term. That's as much like long term as I can put with it. And I mean, to tie it back to powerlifting training, it's kind of the same thing, right? Like your long term approach has to be something that keeps you in the sport, so we can't burn out, we can't suffer long term injuries. But there's a lot of things that still comport with that, and a lot of valid things to attempt. And not to say that all those are worthy of your time, but it does give one lots of options. I see this tying into coaching as well. Like I've talked to coaches. I've been in a fortunate position to be asked by people like, "What would you do?" Or "What did you do when you were a young coach? What advice would you give me?" And it looks almost nothing like what I did, to be honest, because I mean, well, in large part, is because it was a different environment then, and what worked then would not have a prayer of working now. It would just be it's a totally different scenario. So, yeah.
Well, actually, I'm looking on the screen here and I see Kenny, who's I think you're 20 years younger than me. Kenny, how old are you?
I'm 25 or just turned 26.
Okay, 19 years, just short of 20 years. That feels a little better somehow. But if I think about this, I remember when RTS hired you, and I'm like, okay, you found this guy. He's a doctor of physical therapy, or about to be. He's already coaching his like university team. Like he's starting off with some significant assets, and he's joining this company RTS, where it's like, okay, you're gonna go work with the best of the best. You have a lot of assets coming in, and this sport of powerlifting that you're invested in, it's growing fast. It's evolving every day. As you look forward from where you're at, like, what do you see? Like, how do you think about this? And like hearing Mike and I go back and forth and looking backwards, what comes up for you?
That honestly, it's like even a couple of years ago, I would not have thought that this is the position that I'd be in. I'm extremely fortunate to be here and have, like you described, all of those assets that led me to this spot. But if I think about how quickly that has all changed for me, how quickly the sport has changed in that time, and how things are still changing, whether that's like within federations or within the concept of like money meets or things of that nature. I have absolutely no idea where the sport or I will be even like 5 years from now. I still plan to have some role in it, but I like more people can get into meet directing, more people can get into coaching. What form can coaching take? Is there a role for other elements like AI? Will that change the landscape? Will that become good enough? Is a coach going to have more of a human role as compared to human and programming and data interpretation? I like it's all very, very open. And I think being aware of that and willing to adapt to it is probably where I need to keep my focus.
Yeah, like we still haven't seen the generation of coaches who grew up with access to large language models. We're like, you know, 10 years away from that. And so I think when you bring up AI, that absolutely has to have some sort of impact, but we're just like right at the beginning of that hockey stick curve.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to
Definitely.
hear it doesn't sound like old man yells at cloud. Newton, that should probably bring us back to lifting, which I guess is the excuse that we have for bringing you on the podcast. Enjoy whatever tangents and rabbit holes we might find, but our stated reason, at least, was to talk about your experience at USAPL Nationals, and just to talk to you about some of the lessons learned. You always have such good insights on this stuff, and now especially we're 6 weeks, a month, a little more than a month, but around that post competition. So the pressure's really on for you to say something very evolved and enlightened for our benefit. I guess just to set the stage a little bit for you, you won the 56 kilo open. That was your best total at 56 kilos. You broke a bunch of records. I know that at the time, at least, you were kind of disappointed with your squat, and kind of the pro card was a big goal that you had leading into that. But from where I sat, it looked like this was your most competitive package that you've ever brought to the platform, which was awesome to see. And I guess just kind of overall, now that you're thinking back on it, like, how do you reflect on what that experience was and how your performance was?
Yeah, it's very mixed. I think there's I'm going to say some things that'll make it sound like I have multiple personality disorder, but so there's
Anyone
there's
who's done a
some
meet
peop-
will be able to relate. That's fine.
Okay, yeah. So just to validate everyone in their multiple personality disorders, there's this subset of I don't know if you'd say it's in the field of therapy or what. It's called internal family systems. And what I thought that was it's about the dynamics within your household, but that's not what it is. It's within your head, you have a family of personalities in there. And so one school of thought would be like, well, you have all these conflicting voices. You need to figure out your overarching being and values and reintegrate those. And then internal family systems would say, no, you don't. You can have like a team of 5 people in there and they don't have to all agree. You just need to make sure you're the boss of them and the right voice comes out at the right time. And so I discovered this like maybe around, I think this was around the time I decided, you know what, I'm going to cut to 56 kilo and see how far I can push this. And so like the last few years I had like come out of like some pretty significant mental health challenges in my personal life. And I had slowed down in some areas just to heal and recover. And then we did things like we adopted our second child, we moved to LA. So there were a lot of reasons to just build space in my life and reset. Now, as things started to settle, I had this like nagging feeling, like, there's this voice in my head, like, can we start pushing again? And I, via all the therapy I'd done, there was this theory of like, I don't know, that's a traumatized voice speaking. Like that's intergenerational trauma. That's how you were raised. That's feelings of not worthiness. Like maybe. But then I hit this point where I'm like, I don't know what it is. I think it's me, whether it was put on me or it's natively me. It's me. It's not going away. And I kind of want to let that guy out. And so I said, you know what? Okay, we've created space in my life for, the last year or so trying to get back to a better place. I kind of want to run again. And so I started to think about, okay, if I ran and I really pushed in powerlifting, what could I do in the next year or two to be as competitive as possible? And I looked at the numbers around 56 kilo. I looked at where I was in terms of like my own build. And like one thing that inspired me, there's another M1 who is in prime time on Win. He's a good friend of mine. And I remember we did a meet together at 60 kilo and I'm standing next to him. I'm like, holy crap, you were shredded, man. Like, and he's bigger than me. So that's how he was making 60 kilo. And I'm like, what could I do if I got that shredded? They're like, well, one, it would be awesome. And two, I think I could probably get down to 56 kilo. And so I decided like, okay, let's run. Let's see what we can do. So that's was kind of my mindset going in. I really wanted to push and see like, okay, I'm about to turn 45. I'm not supposed to be up in prime time. I'm not supposed to be competing with the kids, but let's see what we can do here. And so, so I pushed, I cut to 56 kilo. I qualified for nationals. I think I came in with the second highest qualifying total. The person with the highest qualifying total, he unfortunately couldn't make it to nationals. So then going in, my training was going great. Like I had my focus dialed in. Mark and I had, I think we have a really good idea of where there's incremental gains to be had on my program. So I was just building and building and building. Just looking at my gym total, I was potentially set up for a 500 dots performance. Like it was quite reasonable to do that. Now going in, I knew that the weight cut was going to be an issue. The timing of prime time, like the amount of time I'd have to stay dehydrated to weigh in, that was going to be an issue. So I worked with Kedrick Kwan over at Performance Training on my plan for both diet and rehydration. But that timing issue around like, I'm going to have to sit dehydrated for longer than, 12 hours is where you probably want to cut it. So I came with a really aggressive rehydration plan. So like Kenny and John, you had to watch me. Like I was basically chugging jugs of electrolyte solution. I had my pickle juice. I was shoveling down carbs. I was eating chocolate and Cheez-Its, which I claim is actually delicious. No one else wanted to try it, but give it a try. Don't knock it till you try it. Now, what happened was, as I was warming up, my body was definitely feeling like the effects of this. And I was kind of treating it like this is part of the game. I've been through this before. Some new things I experienced. My belt was significantly looser than it ever had been, but the granularity on the SBD belt was like, if I make it one notch tighter, it's going to be too tight. And so I'm like, okay, this is going to affect my bracing, but I'm not going to tighten it because I also don't want to strangle myself. The other thing that I felt was I started getting pretty severe cramps that eventually went away, but in my intercostals. I've never experienced that before, but that told me like, okay, something is going on with like the whole core of my body right now. And so I pickle juiced my way through that. I was okay. I stretched, pickle juice, more jugs of electrolyte solution. And then we got up and did the first squat. And we had actually knocked down the opener just 2.5 kilo. And it felt slower than I would have liked. But I was also thinking, you know what? I'm juggling a lot of thoughts and anxiety right now. And so I remember coming off the platform and I had already set my mind like, I will just like, I'm going to shut off my brain. Just like, let's ask John how this looked. It looked good. Like I look at it now and I'm like, yeah, that looks smooth. So we went for the planned second. The planned second, I think that the way my squat technique works is it's not that I stay under the bar, it's my hips shoot back and I get under the bar quite quickly. And that requires both kind of technique as well as enough drive through my legs to do that. I think there was probably some miss on the technique as well as I didn't have the drive on my legs. So that caught me off guard, bar rolled forward, and I missed my second. So we kept the third at 190 kilos. And by then it was really close, but I was gassed at that point. So I think one thing that we did that was really good was we very carefully went through like, not just how do you win or how do you get to 500 dots? We listed out all my goals. Like, what are all the potential goals? So the moment I missed that squat, the first thought is, well, shit. And then the second thought is like, okay, move on. Like, top goal, 500 dots, that's gone. Get that off, re-optimize. Like, you have lots of other goals to hit. How do we optimize the plan to do that? And that's exactly where the discussion went. So it was like, yeah, you have disappointment, but we immediately had like awesome, inspiring things to grab onto and pursue right away.
Just to pause on that for a second, because there's some really cool things you just said there that I think would be useful to just touch on for a moment. First, that's a really hard thing to do in the moment. Anybody who misses a lift in competition, it's very difficult to turn around and say, how do I re-optimize the game plan? How do I re-optimize my focus? And where do I place it? And I have to say, I've been on other podcasts and I continue to talk about that. Your ability to come into the event prepared down to the hour, minute with your plan written out. You were talking about the rehydration plan, the level of preparation that you've put into that. And then the level of internal awareness that you have that, yes, you're frustrated, but the time for frustration is now over. That needs to go over here. And now it's time to reorient and focus. That is something that I think is really mature and one that is hard to teach. You need those teachable moments that has to happen to you in order to experience what that's like. And if you could maybe package that for a lifter that hasn't experienced it, what would you say are some of the techniques that you use to sort of compartmentalize those feelings and then move on? Like, what's your tactic?
So it wasn't really I'll say like, let's talk about developing this capacity, and then I'll talk about like the tactical in the moment. So developing this capacity, this is a painful journey I did not plan, but if we just talk about time under the bar, like that's how you get strong. The way that you get really good with disappointment is you hit yourself with a lot of disappointment reps up through a 45-year-old life. Well, Like, that was not planned, but the number of piano recitals where I've bombed, trumpet performances where I've bombed, speeches I've bombed. Um, my wife, the first time I asked her out, she rejected me. The number of colleges I got rejected from, the number of grad schools I got rejected from, speeches I have bombed at work, difficult conversations at work I have bombed, and then thought like, well, I really screwed up that relationship. I have a lot of reps in the tank. And so let's just think about that. It's like, yeah, I'm 45, like, and I'm going to go get more disappointment reps in today, because that's what it's like to lead an organization of people. It's like titrating how much disappointment can they take at any one time, because you're always driving transformation and change. So like, I have a massive amount of time under the disappointment bar. I would ask someone else, I'm like, if you don't have, like, if you've never had to fail in public and you're about to go to your first nationals, I'm like, holy crap. Like, I'm going to be there to hug you and hold your hand, because it hurts the first few times. To do it on that big of a stage, that's hard. But what I would ask others to say is like, Mike, this goes back to our discussion of, do you learn things from powerlifting and take it in? This is like, you learn from the rest of life, you take it into powerlifting. So reflect, because we're all living life. We all have those disappointments. And that is your time under the disappointment bar. Like, don't let that go to waste. You can use it to just turn into narratives about how you suck and how nothing goes right. Or you can turn it into a narrative about how you're strong and you're ready for this moment now, whether it goes well or not. So that's how I built that capacity.
Inspiring.
In the moment. Yeah, like, let me package that and sell that to someone.
No, that's real life though. Like, it reminds me of how people talk about building patience. Like you don't build patience by getting everything you want right away. So, sorry,
Yes.
not to derail you, Newton.
I wonder if the T-shirt from RTS that says "Get under the disappointment bar" is going to sell pretty well. I just get the sense that it won't, guys. Just saying.
You might be surprised on that one. I would wear that.
As I'm trying to get more consistent on my Instagram posting, and I'm surprised at how well my carousels do, where I just like put my random thoughts into a carousel and they actually get the most engagement of anything I do. I think I need to do one around getting under the disappointment bar. If nothing else, it might make some people feel a little more validated about their lives.
I'll hit the like button.
I appreciate that. So in the moment, I think what's happening is like, one, I'm now pretty good with disappointment. So the actual impact of it, it's just not going to hit me that hard. Like the Coach Gabby, I saw that thing she posted where it was a message from, a hypothetical message from one of her lifters, something like, I just missed my top set. I don't know why we're even doing this. I want to cry. I want to quit. And I was like, whoa. And I know she wasn't just making that up. That's probably inspired by something she hears quite often. And so then I ran a poll to ask people like, do others actually feel like this regularly? And actually the vast majority of lifters who responded to my poll said yes. Which was surprising. I think, well, one, first it was surprising. And then two, it was just kind of awareness of like, dude, you remember you're 45. You spent a lot of time under the disappointment bar. That's why you don't have those thoughts anymore. And so that was my reaction to the moment. Like, okay, well, 500 dots. It is not happening this year. It gives me something to shoot for next year. That's awesome. But because we had planned, and, I think there was a few things. One, we had planned. So I knew, like, should these not happen, and I had treated it like an unlikely scenario, but I said, should these not happen? I'm like, well, here we are. What do we do now? Reoptimize the list of goals, reoptimize the plan to hit those goals, move forward. I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is, in kind of like moments of volatility, it's get other perspectives, collect more data. And so we rehuddled right away. Like, okay, where are we at? What did we see? How might this show up on bench? And so, I think you guys asked me that, and bench is the leading indicator of overall strength. Or no, squat is a leading indicator for overall strength for the day for me. So John, right away, you were like, okay, let's drop bench opener. I'm like, sounds good. That de-risks the whole thing. And if bench strength is there, we can take a bigger jump. And then based on that and seeing how I continued to feel, we'd say, and if I feel better and better, we can go with deadlifts according to plan, or we can knock those down too, and then take bigger jumps. And then from there, it was, I think the last mindset trick is to say, okay, I can spend the rest of my time in this warm-up room, like ruminating on what's going on, or I can soak this in and enjoy, like, both. I love competing, I love lifting, and there was some like crazy shit going on during that flight with the 60 and 67.5 kilos. So it's like, hang out with the cool people, hang out with the community, have fun lifting, watch some spectacles of human performance.
Yeah.
So there was plenty of positive to reorient my attention.
Yeah. I really like the idea of kind of having a hierarchy of goals and spending some time on that too is something that I've kind of updated my approach on, somewhat recently. I'm not sure exactly when all that started, but kind of taking some time to think about, okay, yeah, this is what we expect to happen, but what would be, what would like a minimum performance day be like, and what's, worth doing? What other goals are out there? Like, what can we adjust to? Spending some time with that has made a big difference. Can we go back for a second to something you said earlier? You were talking about kind of this voice inside, kind of urging you toward wanting to push it again, and
Mhm.
kind of juxtapose that with a statement you made earlier about kind of the Mike Tyson feeling of being that guy.
Yeah.
So like it seems like um, as time passes, our relationship to some of these voices changes a little bit. So wanting to push and then pushing, and then you go through the competitive experience and you're like, okay, that's what that was like. That was what being that guy was like. Does it feel kind of like a flow state in a sort of like, I mean, it's more protracted than like a single bout, but is that kind of what we're talking about? That kind of hyper focus?
It kind of does. It feels to me more like very unabashed selfishness. And I'll give you one specific example of what that's like. And it's, with when Mike Tyson says, I don't like, he doesn't like his mental state, like that gets really scary to me because that's Mike Tyson. So I'll give you an example, like way less scary. To make it to 56 kilo, like I really need to manage my diet carefully. Like I can blow my diet by snacking on grapes at night, and which is just crazy. And so I carry around a portable food scale, and at work we have a salad bar, and I have to decide like, okay, I need to weigh everything. The best way to do this is as I go, I weigh things as I put them in the bowl. It's going to make the line incrementally slower, and I might piss some people off. The thing that happens in my head is to say, do you care about pissing them off more or hitting your goals? I'm like, goals. And they're like, great, get over it. Piss some people off. Look like the weird guy with the food scale. There's a book coming out called Fear of Other People's Opinions by a guy named Mike Gervais, who he's like one of the world's most famous sports psychologists. Like he used to work with the Seattle Seahawks. He's created this company, Compete to Create. but he has a whole book on how just fear of other people's opinions hold us back. And so what I found, like, especially with maintaining a diet, part of it's discipline. So much of the barrier was like looking like the weird guy. And I see that like a lot of the time when people say, they're like, how are you doing that? Oh, I could never do that. And I ask, why not? Like, part of it is the restriction in the diet. Part of it is you need to show up in social situations willing to do some really weird stuff. Like, I get a tiny sliver of birthday cake at the kid's birthday party, and then I have to ask them to like keep the cake away from me because I'm like, yeah, because I will totally collapse in terms of like self-control. And the first time you have that conversation, it's super weird. And then after that, they're like, oh yeah, Newton's the weird guy. Like, great, we're there. You and I are on the same page. Yes, I'm the weird guy. Get the cake away from me.
I have a funny analogy or example of that. When I did bodybuilding, I remember going into corporate America with this gigantic like 6-pack fitness bag filled with food, right, for like the whole day. And I remember coming in and people were like, what the heck are you bringing in here? What is that thing? We went to this seminar one time. You know, everybody's sitting down eating, and you know, seminar food's never good for you ever. And here I am with a 6-pack fitness bag, dressed in a suit, bringing it and sitting at this table, and everybody's like, what the heck? And it's like, at the time, I just didn't care because I cared about doing my my pro season and being the very best that I could be. And it was really difficult work. And that the interesting thing about that is going to the conversation you had earlier, Mike, about some of those skills transcending and being applicable to other areas of life. That's totally true for powerlifting. I've been multiple times able to do that and be able to take from those skills of bodybuilding and apply it into powerlifting. And so I think, and the same goes true for applying it into the business sector or work or family life, being able to apply those. I don't really care. This is something that's important to me. And, but I agree, Newton. I think that, you know, to be able to accomplish something that's deeply important and personal to you, there has to be a great deal of sacrifice. And sometimes that sacrifice is socially and the perceptions that other people, and sometimes it's not even the perceptions from other people. It's what you believe their perceptions are of you. You know, Ross would talk about that, you know, from a mindset perspective of like how the story that we make up about what someone else is thinking about us. Who knows? Maybe that person's sitting back saying, hey, Newton, I think it's pretty cool that scale you got. I know I would. If I saw you break out a scale like that and hold up the line and be like, hey, man, can I borrow that for a second? You know, where'd you buy that from? You know, maybe people are looking at you thinking that, you know.
A few people have stopped me and asked me, and I'm like, good for you. Like,
see,
get on the food scale team. I think the other thing that comes up is not just being the weird guy, but fewer people have expressed this to me, but it comes out. It's like when they see you really pursuing something and sticking to something, it makes them feel bad. And it can come out in some really passive aggressive ways. It might come out as like them mocking you. Or if they're a little more open and honest with themselves, it comes out as like, now I feel bad about all the things I want to do. And I feel like where I'm letting myself down by not pursuing them the way you are. And again, I'm not responsible for their comfort. And there might have been a time where I might have tried to hide these things a little bit more. But I'm like, no, I do not have the cognitive bandwidth on 1,500 calories a day to do that. So like,
I was going to say, like, at a certain point, the thing you're trying to do is too hard. So you just don't, you can't worry about all that stuff.
Yes. Yeah. I think of it as, so I struggle a little bit, and hopefully this doesn't tank my LinkedIn following, but a lot of people follow me because I will talk about mental health and the importance of self-care, but I've been trying to evolve my message there because most of the people who follow me, I get a lot of strong comments of like, yes, take care of yourselves, create space in your life, slow down. And I'm trying to like tell them like, that's not exactly what I'm saying. So here's what I'm actually saying is like, slow down on the stuff that doesn't matter to you. but pick something so big and awesome to you that when you shove it into the limited capacity of your life, it squeezes all the rest of the bullshit out. And that's really kind of like, if I had to sum up what the last year was like, it was like once I committed to that, we're like, all the bullshit's got to go, because I literally do not have the calories for it.
Well, I mean, I dig that a lot, that there's kind of an overall, I mean, this is what you're talking about too, I think, is that there's kind of an overall message of the way to mental health is leisure, and
Yes.
making things easier for oneself. But that's not really, it doesn't do anybody any good. And I think there's a bunch of people, I haven't given a lot of thought, but I might be included in that bunch, where that kind of messages doesn't resonate that much, because I'm not trying to, that's not the kind of life that I'm trying to live, the easy one, And I mean, that's what you're talking about as well, like picking something that's hard to do, that means something to you, and
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. I think of it as like, I actually have a friend who he's, a high performing corporate stiff like me. So he's, he's pretty accomplished in the corporate system, but he sees my posts and he's like, I find it fascinating because my brain doesn't work that way at all. I am not goal oriented. He's like very leisure oriented. And I see the way he lives his life and he interacts with his family, and it's really admirable. And he's truly building the life that he wants. For me though, I'm like, okay, but I don't think you're my audience. If I take this back to social media, like I'm trying to speak to people like me, where I'm like, I don't know where this fire comes from. It's in me. It's not coming out anytime soon. And so I better learn to use it really, really well.
Well, that kind of goes back to, that desire from inside wanting to push, and I mean, it sounds like when that started to come up for you, that there was a bit of introspection and questioning over whether following that is a good idea or not. And it sounds like at some point you just want to,
Yes.
you kind of realize, like, we can, introspect a lot and kind of ask ourselves, like, is this me or is this something else? But at some point, I just want that, you know? And so, yeah,
Yes.
you find a way to go after it.
So I tried this post on LinkedIn, and I think it landed with like 20% of the audience, and everyone else still just saw what they wanted to see in it. Where I talked about this, where I said, like, the premise was like, hey, didn't you burn out and go on mental health leave? Now, like a year later, why are you choosing this even bigger goal? Like, what the hell are you doing, man? And what I said was like, the reason that I do this is everything else I do in life, like I am serving and I'm giving in service of others. Holding on to big goals around powerlifting and protecting that time, like for me, that's like the most radical act of self-care. It's like, this is my declaration of like, I love myself enough that I'm going to hold on to this, even at the expense of all these other people I'm trying to serve. And, I got maybe a few responses in the category of like, hell yeah, me too. And then there was most of them, like 80% of them were more of the flavor of like, yes, self-care is important. We need to slow down. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, I thought this was pretty direct, but I appreciate that social media is just a mirror for everyone to see what they want to see. But it was just a really interesting reaction. So for me, it was like, yes, this is how I take care of myself, by beating the shit out of myself in the gym.
Well, it is super interesting, even to hear about your friend who you said was more leisure oriented. I think there's a bit of an echo chamber effect here for me. Is I just don't encounter people that are oriented that way very much, because most of the people I'm interacting with are powerlifters to some degree or another. They're probably going to skew in this direction, because otherwise you don't, like, somebody a long time ago asked me, we were talking about powerlifting, and the topic of fun came up, and I said, like, I wouldn't really describe it as fun, not anymore. It's not like, oh, yay, it's fun to go train. I mean, there is a deep satisfaction to it, but I wouldn't describe it as fun, you know?
Yeah, I think there's a valid criticism that one of my friends gave me, where she asked, "How often in life do you just feel like you're playing?" And I'm like, "Well, uh, I let myself try to max out my 10 rep squat. Like that felt like fun." And I was like, "Shit, that's the best thing I could come up with." And I am playing with my kids, but it's also like a different type of play. And so there's a valid criticism there of like, okay, I know the science around play. I know the science around like actual leisure time. That's a box I am not checking right now in terms of self-care. But I think one of the things I try to keep in mind, there's actually he's a VP at Google. And before that, he was like a director at Facebook. He started a froyo chain. He won the game show Survivor. His name's Yul Kwan. He's got just this crazy resume. And I heard an interview with him, and the interviewer asked, "What is the through line on your resume?" It's like a really valid question. And his response is like, I use it kind of as a guardrail. He said, "I know a lot of the things I want in life. As I look at any one opportunity, I've never found one that checks all the boxes. And so I look at the opportunities and I choose one and I say, is this good enough for now?" And so for me, I think this bucket of everything in life, it's good enough for now. And it's a pretty good life. Like I'd like to play more, but I'll just do that by maxing out my 10 rep squat once in a while. And that's good enough for now.
Yeah, fair enough. And well, to take us back to squats for a minute, I suppose a question that I had for you regarding the squats at nationals, that stood out to me. And we can talk about kind of the goals that did get checked off and that stuff as well. But I know that the lessons learned usually come from things that didn't quite go to plan. So what were some of the things that you picked out from that? Like, what do you think you'll be doing different next time?
So there's a few things. I think one is in terms of timing and rehydration. If I'm going to be in a prime time competition, normally what if you're doing a rapid weight loss cut, like the night before you finish drinking your water before you go to bed, and then you sleep, and then for a normal competition you'd go weigh in the morning and you'll be fine. But for prime time, you wake up and then you sit around until 4 p.m. and you kind of just manage your weight to try to stay around your weigh-in weight, which is a state of dehydration. And so I think what I need to do is figure out like, okay, I might need to be drinking water throughout the night. So I'll sacrifice sleep quality to continually like stay hydrated as long as possible. So I think that's one thing. The other thing that I've done is I bought a sauna blanket. I'm sensitizing myself to exposure to heat. So I'm up to the max setting in my sauna suit for 20 minutes or 25 minutes. And now Kedrick is going to have me start doing 3 rounds of 20 minutes. And so now I have like hopefully I'll come in with like some levers to pull of like, okay, I know I can pull this lever if I have to. And hopefully I'll be sensitized to the heat and it won't be that impactful. So that's on the weight cut. On the training, I have to account for like my leverages may change. So there's 2 things I'm investigating. If it's a belt issue and I can't brace, the SBD belt, hopefully this doesn't get me shitlisted by SBD, but the granularity on the holes, it's just not small enough. But the Pioneer adjustable lever has very small granularity. And I saw that the A7 belt just got IPF approved should I ever go IPF. So I need to figure out where my wife will allow me to do this, but I think I will make a switch to an A7 or just use my Inzer with the PAL adjustable lever. For leverage at the bottom of the squat, because I do a rebound, a heavy rebound squat, I need to make sure that like, okay, my squat might go deeper. I need to make sure there's power from the bottom of the squat. And so Mark and I have been doing a lot of SSB box squats with a longer pause. I probably got to do some like extra deep either pin and or pause squats and build that up over time. And then for my single leg work, where I do a lot of single leg split squat variations, I'm just going to have to go deeper and or probably do a heel lift so my heel or so my knee can go into like a deeper level of flexion. And so it's like I might lose something, but I'm going to gain more. I'm going to come in with more strength in that bottom position. Yeah. Let's see. What else did I learn? I think I told myself coming out of this, my top goal was, or my most aggressive goal was get that Open Pro card. And so I've treated this meet as, if I use the philosophy, there's not failure, there's learning if you keep going. I came out of it telling myself, okay, you didn't learn everything you needed to get to 500 dots. And so I think there's, I'm still trying to reflect on, like, I can look at all the technical sides of the training. Like, for example, one thing I allowed myself to do to heighten my focus during training was, I would listen to my specific playlist that were programmed for my attempts. And I would do those for, usually there was 3 ascending lifts for each of my competition training sets. So that was drilled into my head. That probably was some sort of ergogenic aid. So previously where I would have thought I hadn't done that, and then I come in and I turn on the music, I probably got some adrenaline boost or some sort of arousal boost. I might have been getting that through training this whole time, and therefore my numbers looked inflated. So now I'm dropping the music to say, like, okay, let's really test this. Like two things to train there. One is to say, do I lose performance? And then second is, can I get the performance back without the music? And so now I'm doing, there's a scientist, Leah Lagos, who does a lot of training around heart rate variability, not as like, how do I use this to auto-regulate, but more, how do I train my heart rate variability so that in times of stress, like I can get my mind into the state that I need it to be in faster. So that's another thing I'm adjusting. I think that's where I'm at with lessons learned on the technical side. And then the other thing, I think it's just a lot of reflection. And so one of the things that I've been playing with is, there's this philosophy of, when you're trying to figure out how to improve or optimize, like, what are the big rocks? Like, or keep it simple, stick to the basics. I don't actually think that works at this level. Like, I think that got me to this level. I don't think it's going to work anymore. So another way I'm thinking about it is, like, if I think about why I do things, how I do them, and what I do, how do I think at the very macro? Like, so if I ask the why question, it's like the big why question, like, why anything? Why are you doing this? And then at the very micro level, it's why this movement? Why are you approaching this rep this way? And so just strengthening, say, like knee extension for the squat, I've gotten very, very, very precise on that. Another way to think about it is strategy. Like the how is, if I think very macro, I have to think about, like, where do you want this journey to go in 1, 3, 5, or even 10 years? And I have possible milestones mapped out. And then taking to the micro, it's, very much like, how are you going to wring out the value you want out of this specific workout or this meal, or even, again, this rep? And so, like, I go to the far edges and ask, like, where's my growth edge? and therefore, what do I got to do differently?
I mean, that's
I just want to call out. I got 3 minutes, and then I got to jump to a meeting.
all right. Okay. Well, I suppose in that case, I'll summarize some things real quick, and then we'll let you go. But yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I want to mention how valuable it must be to have an athlete that's as switched on as you are. And that's something that I try to encourage in all of my athletes, and why I think being a student of the sport is so important, so you can bring that level of attention to detail to to all of the sets that you do, and so that you understand what that intention is, because that's not something that a coach can reasonably provide to you at all times, like even down to how should I be really shoving my knee forward when I do these split squats or not, like to some extent that's coaching cue that can be provided, but it goes a lot better if the athlete has an underlying understanding of what it is that we're doing. And I I didn't want to necessarily finish up on a reflection of what could have gone better with the squat, but I do want to maybe leave you with this thought that something that I wrote in my notes was that, like, I personally found a lot of inspiration from watching you compete at nationals, and I think there's a lot of positive to take away from it, a lot of positive to learn from it, not least of which is just courage and attempt selection. I'm competing tomorrow morning, and that's been something that's on my mind, right? Like, you do have to eventually put it on the bar and try, if you're gonna ever have a hope of lifting it. So it was really good to see you compete. Like I said, really inspiring for me personally, and I know a lot of other people as well. And I'm looking forward to seeing you compete at the next one.
Thank you. I'm gonna the next one. I'm coming for that 500 dots. I'm gonna be even more shredded and older. Like I keep thinking about, like, I'm gonna be 50 soon, and you can think about that two ways. Like, oh, 50 over the hill, or I could think about that's 5 years to get even more strong and shredded. That's the plan.
Fantastic, man. All right. Well, thanks very much for your time, Newton. I always appreciate it, man.
All right, good to see you all. Thank you.